How to remove your Beetle engine. Ready, set, go. Hey, I'm Callahan. Welcome to Callahan's Garage. All right, so first things first, we're going to go over everything that you're going to need. Obviously, we're going to need to get the car jacked up, so you're going to need a floor jack of some sort, some nice jack stands to get the car up as high as you can. If you only have a little small floor jack, it'll work totally fine. I've done it plenty of times like that. You just probably need some blocks of wood or something to help you get the car up, because once we get the engine out, we're going to have to get it out from under the car, so we need to be able to get the car lifted up pretty high. And then as far as tools to get the engine out, we really don't need a lot. We need an 8mm, we need a couple of 17mm. If you have a ratcheting wrench, that's nice, but the bottom nuts on the engine case, you're going to need a regular wrench to get on those. Typically, we need a 13mm for everything on a Volkswagen, a flathead screwdriver for all our engine 10 screws, something to keep track of your hardware with. And keep in mind, if your car has been finagled with or has any aftermarket parts on it, you may need some other stuff, but if you have a set of basic hand tools, that's all we're going to need. All right, so first major thing we need to do in the engine bay is get all of our engine wiring disconnected. But before we do that, we need to make sure the battery under the back seat is disconnected. Okay, so our battery's disconnected. We can start disconnecting the wiring in our engine bay. We're going to start over here with our voltage regulator and our generator. So this is still a 6-volt car. It may look a little bit different than some of the later model stuff. So if you have an alternator, you'll just have one nut for your main power, and you'll have a spade connector for your idiot light. So we're just going to disconnect all of this. If you need to label these, do that. But after you've done this 1,000 times, you know which ones are which. Once all that is disconnected, we can just pull it through out of the way. You will also have your oil pressure signal wire that goes down to here. Mine is already broken, so we didn't even have to worry about that. Okay, so next we need to undo the throttle cable from our carburetor. And again, depending on what year engine you're working on, this may look a little bit differently, but we got an 8mm. A lot of times you'll need a pair of pliers to hold your cable as well. So we can just grab onto the end of our cable like so, and then use our wrench to loosen this up. Once this is loose, our cable will just pull out. Our cable should pull out of our barrel nut. Now that that's loose, if you have an earlier car, sometimes it will have this spring mechanism. It just pushes in and this retainer comes off. And then this whole spring will come off. Most of the time you'll still have this straw that goes through our fan shroud. And sometimes people will put a clamp on the back side of this to hold it in. You don't necessarily have to take this out. We just have to push our throttle cable through and pull that out from the back side of the engine once we get underneath it. Okay, so that's most of everything that we have to disconnect on the top side. The next thing we need to do is remove this rear tin. And this is the first thing that can be difficult because we have a multitude of flathead screws and they rust together and grow together. So if your engine is half as crusty as mine, they can be difficult to get off. So make sure you got you a big flathead screwdriver and just start working on these. You may need to use some penetrating oil or something to get them loose. Also, if you have a later model engine, you will have the fresh air hoses that come down through this. They may have some clamps on them that need to be undone and taken off. But this is a stale air 40 horse. This is what most people would consider to be an earlier engine, so we don't have that. So we just need to get this tin out of the way. Typically, these will come out okay as long as you got a big screwdriver on them. But like I said, sometimes they can be a real nightmare to get out. And there's just a series of them around the perimeter of this tin, so just look at it and make sure you get them all. Otherwise, this thing is not going to come out of here. And once you get all the screws out, this thing will just pull out, easy peasy. Okay, so the next and last thing that we need to do topside is get the 2 upper engine mount bolts out. And this is where our 17mm wrench is going to come in. And it's going to be difficult for me to show these to you because they're behind our fan shroud here. But all you need to do, take your wrench, you can reach around behind here, find them, get the wrench onto them, and then loosen them up. Now, this may be the first thing where you need some assistance with, especially if your car doesn't have the correct starter bolt in it anymore, and the bolt will rotate as you're trying to loosen it. So you may have to get someone to get on the underside and hold that bolt for you while you take the nut off. Okay, so like I said, we've got our 2 17mm back here. We have our starter side, and then Over here we have our clutch arm side. Now if you have an earlier engine, it will look like this, where we have the two nuts back here and we don't have our doghouse style oil cooler. If you have a later model engine, this clutch arm side will be a bolt from the front side and it'll just have a nut cert back here. So you'll only have to do the starter side 17mm, and the next one we'll do when we get underneath the car. So like I said, just put your wrench on here. You should be able to loosen this up. And if you have the correct starter bolt on there, you should just be able to loosen this all the way up and take the nut off. If not, like I said, you have to get somebody to get under the car and help you out with it, which it seems like we may have to do. Okay, so we got both of our top engine mount bolts out. They were both the incorrect bolts, so I had to get my assistant out here to help me get them off. But now we can move underneath the car. Okay, so next thing we're gonna do underneath the car, we have a heater box connection, one on each side of our engine, one for each heater box. This is just an 8mm barrel nut, just like our throttle cable. So put some pliers on these, undo the nut, we can pull our heater cable loose, and then we can move on to our engine mount bolts. Then next we can move up to the clutch arm side of our transmission where our fuel line comes out of the tunnel, and we need to remove that fuel line. And mine's in pretty sorry shape. It's already dry rotted and crusty. So I'm just gonna clamp this off and then I'm gonna cut it. If you're gonna reuse yours, you know, obviously just unhook them. And you may lose some gas out of here when you take these off, so make sure you are prepared for that. All right, now that's loose, and if your car still has the heater bellows in them, you can go ahead and just reach up in here and slide those off as well. You got one on each side. They should just pull loose. And now we are ready to move on to our bottom engine mount bolts. Now, these will usually be super covered in crud, and a lot of times they'll be really hard to get to, especially if your engine mounts are totally oil soaked and swollen up like these are. But this is where you're going to need your regular boxed in 17mm, and sometimes some wrenches still won't even fit on here. It's just a really snug fit up against our transmission case. So finagle your wrench up on here, take both of these nuts loose, and then we'll be ready to pull the engine out. Now at this point, this is where a lot of people would start to panic because they think the engine's going to fall out on them. The engine is not going to fall out once you take these loose. Like, we still have to pull it out off of the input shaft and clear the clutch and everything. So you don't have to worry about sticking the jack up under here and getting all in your way. Just go ahead and undo these, and then we'll put our jack under here. And these can be pretty tricky, and a lot of times you only really get a quarter turn at a time. So just take your time, be patient, work these off of here. And a lot of times when I put these back on, I will use a washer and a 15mm head stud nut, and that gives us just a little bit slimmer nut, but it's easier to get a wrench on. You can use your ratcheting wrench when you're taking these on and off. So especially if you're going to be taking your engine in and out, you know, repeatedly, that makes this a lot easier and a lot quicker. Oh yeah, that's good and crusty. Okay, so we've got everything on our engine taken loose. We're ready to take the engine out of the car now, so we can take our floor jack and we can just need to roll it up under the engine, and we're going to jack this up to right under the sump plate on the bottom of the engine. And like I said before, you don't have to have a huge floor jack. You can do this with a smaller floor jack. I've done it a million times, but a bigger jack definitely makes it a little bit easier. Also, putting a block of wood or like a transmission pad on the floor jack, if you have one, can make this a little bit easier. Okay, so you can see where I've got my jack positioned, just kind of right on the front half of our sump plate. It's totally fine to jack it up right there. You know, these engines don't weigh enough for us to like be worried about this punching through the bottom of the engine or doing anything crazy like that. So just get your jack situated and then just pump it up just a little bit so we get a little bit of pressure on the bottom of the engine. We don't want to jack the car up. We just want to take some of the tension off of this engine so that we can slide it backwards. Okay, so now we've got our jack in place. We're ready to slide this engine back off of our transmission input shaft, and then we can lower it down out of the car. So if your engine is crusty like this and it hasn't been out of the car in a long time, sometimes this can be kind of difficult to get it wiggled out off of here. but we can just grab the fan shroud, grab an exhaust, or grab both of your exhaust tips if they're nice and solid, and just kind of wiggle this thing backwards and out. And there we go. We're pretty much free now. Now we can use our jack to kind of resituate the engine and lower it out of the car. All right, so our engine is loose. We're ready to drop it out of the car. Before I do that, I'm gonna reach back here. I'm gonna make sure my throttle cable is pulled out of the way. Make sure your wiring and everything is pulled out of the way so we don't grab any of it as we're coming out. And then I'm just gonna peek back here, make sure I'm off of my transmission bell housing good, and then I'm ready to lower this down. So if you're doing this by yourself for the first time, get somebody to help you with this. If you've done it a few times, it's relatively straightforward. You just want to kind of tip the engine forward towards the front of the car, and then you can slowly let it down at the same time. If your car's in really good shape, you know, put some tape on here, take your pulleys off, make sure you don't beat up your apron. But in this case, we're just going to make sure we got some clearance, and we're going to slowly ease this down out of here. And you can see I've just got a hold of it, supporting it as it lowers itself down. I'm going to let it go all the way down. And boom, we're out. Okay, so now you can see what I was talking about earlier, where having the car jacked up high enough becomes really important, because we need to be able to get the engine out from under the car. So if you only have a small floor jack, this is the point where you would need to kind of block up the body a little bit more. Or if you consult your idiot book, it will say to just get a couple of buddies and pick the car up over the engine. That works as well. But we're going to drag this thing out of here and then we're done. So I'm going to pop this air cleaner off, and then we should be able to just weasel this thing right out of here. And most of the time you got a little more space over to the side of the car. Let's see, that's just clear. We're out of here. Okay, so our engine's out. Hopefully that was a nice, concise, step-by-step how-to on this. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. In the next video, we're going to start working on the engine. I've got a bunch of new videos coming up in my new 62 ragtop Beetle. So we're going to do a bunch of how-tos, a bunch of tutorials on all the mechanical work we have to do to it. So if there's something specific that you want to see, leave it in the comments. If it's something you're into, please subscribe and keep sticking around and show the channel some support. And I will see you guys next time.